You are listening to the So Now What podcast with Lana Manikowski, episode number 20. So now what? These three words raced through my mind time and time again during my journey through fertility treatments. I tried desperately to have a child, but never was able. I yearned for a community to join that could understand my struggles. I couldn't find one, so I created one with the So Now What podcast. I love that you found us. Here we are, 20 episodes in. I've got to tell you, thank you. For anyone, if this is your first episode or your 20th episode that you've listened to the So Now What podcast, thank you for your support and interest in a topic that so many people shy away from talking about. And I'm just so grateful that we have the ability to find each other and connect with each other and truly learn from each other and, most importantly, build a community together. So, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, know that this is a place that you can come back to every week, learn something to possibly consider and implement into your life, and help you to realize that the inability to not have a child does not have to prevent you from living a life that you love, a life that feels fulfilled and feels meaningful. So, before we get started, I want to thank you for all of the feedback that you continuously give to me on the podcast. And I hope that you never stop offering me thoughts and ideas and new suggestions for upcoming episodes. And I'm going to ask you to please comment and rate the podcast, regardless of where you're listening to it. The likelihood of this podcast showing up when someone is searching for resources of coping with life after IVF or life without children is going to come because there's some sort of interaction between my listeners and my podcast. So if you could just do me that huge favor of a comment and a rating, I would so appreciate it. On last week's podcast, we talked about how to love your life again after IVF. And I shared with you that I'm creating the guide to loving your life again, which is totally free, available if you want to download it from stitchcoaching.com or on Instagram in my bio. So let's get started. Last week, we talked about how we are going to decipher the difference between our thoughts and circumstances. And this is something that is really the foundation of what I teach my clients. You might need to listen to this podcast a couple times. I'm going to probably cover on this a few more times in the next couple weeks because it is something that takes a while to really start to understand. So that's exactly why I have following along by doing your paper thinking, because we're going to use your entries into your paper thinking and your journal entries to really start to figure out how to decipher the difference between your thought, which is basically a story that you have in your mind, and your circumstances, which are the facts that are in your life. And because we lived it, so many of us can share a story about infertility. And all of us think that our stories are true. We think that we're just relaying the information about our stories in a way that seems right to us, that they're just observations about our experiences. And we don't understand that the way we interpret the world is not true to everyone. The only place that truth really exists is in our mind. And the truth and what we believe is true becomes the truth in our life. You might need to rewind and listen to that again. So we think that we are just relaying information about our stories in a way that seems right to us. They're observations about our experiences, but the way that we see and interpret them is not necessarily true to everyone around us. So the only place that the truth exists is in our mind, and what we believe is true becomes the truth in our life. So you may have heard stories of two people experiencing the same event, maybe something from their childhood where there was two siblings that encountered the same things. Maybe from a crime scene, they were witness to a crime and they're giving their story, or maybe something that happened and you ask each of them to tell you what happened, and they tell the version of the truth about what they saw and what they experienced, but they are two very different accounts. And say they get a lie detector test, and neither of them are lying. Which one is the truth? So, how do we know what the truth is? Does the truth exist outside of people, or does the truth exist in each of us in different ways? What I want to offer to you is that the truth exists differently in each of us. And what the determination of the truth is not someplace out there that we're going to find. It's actually what we are choosing to believe. And all of that is going to happen right here inside of us and in our lives. This is where all of your agency is, and where all of your power is, and all of your choice is. Because none of your power exists in circumstances. Circumstances are just basic, like boring, neutral things that exist out there that just don't really mean anything. There's no colorful adjectives or language or descriptors or drama in a circumstance. If a circumstance to you is negative, it's because of your thoughts about it. Otherwise, it's just completely neutral, because all circumstances are neutral. So if I were to ask you to tell me about a negative circumstance, what I'm pointing out is that you're interpreting that circumstance as negative because there's no such thing as a negative or a positive circumstance. All right, so keep with me here. I want you to think right now, there is something happening in the world. Someone's dying, someone's being abused, someone is being hurt right now at this very moment. That circumstance is happening somewhere out in the world, but it's neutral to us. We're not affected by that circumstance at this very moment. Is that circumstance happening? Is that abuse happening? Is that death happening? Yes. Is it affecting us in a negative way? No. Not at this very moment, no. And why not? Because before I brought it up, we weren't even thinking about it. We weren't aware of it happening, but it was going on. So therefore, it's happening. There are people starving out there right now. There are people being abused. There are people dying. There are people being hurt, but it's not affecting us. We're not experiencing it because we're not thinking about it. But let's bring it a little bit closer to home. Let's say someone died. Say that person actually died a few days ago. I don't know, maybe last week, Thursday. Their death is a circumstance. It's neutral. If someone hadn't told you it happened and you get the news days later, it's neutral. You actually don't know yet that it's happened. It hasn't touched you in the heart yet or your emotions yet. You didn't know that that person died last Thursday. When it exists out in the world and hasn't reached you yet, their death remains neutral until you have a thought about it. When that person calls to tell you that someone passed away last Thursday that you knew. And how you choose to think about that death will determine all of the feelings that you have. So people dying, people getting divorced, a negative pregnancy test, an embryo with a chromosomal abnormality, all that is neutral until we have a thought about it. And then we start affecting our lives with the circumstances. Without consciousness, without thoughts, everything is just neutral. It just is. All right, so let me try giving you this example. My reproductive endocrinologist called me to tell me my frozen embryo had been tested and has trisomy 16. It would never make it to a full-term pregnancy. The sequencing of that embryo was in existence for months before I was even made aware of it, but I just didn't know. I may have carried hope in that embryo for all those months preceding that phone call, but the embryo was still the same from the time it was fertilized. It had trisomy 16. I had so much angst and devastation by the results that were shared with me, but someone else may not have. Someone could feel grateful and think, thank goodness I know this. Thank goodness I had testing done and I don't have to go through with a transfer that would end up in a miscarriage. That doesn't mean that there would be high fives all around about the news, but it's a way to see how a circumstance, my phone call with results from my RE, can create different emotions depending on the way someone thinks about the words that are shared with them. So the circumstance means nothing until we have a thought about it. So why does all of this matter? Each day we have lots of emotions and lots of stories. And what I want you to know is that what's going on in your mind, your thoughts, is what's creating the experiences in your life. And I often find that when my beautiful clients start out working with me, they look at circumstances as the cause of their feelings, and they want so desperately to change their circumstance. But working with an LCS certified coach, I can help you see your mind and how you're thinking about your facts and how you'll be able to separate those facts from thoughts. And you can learn to identify what are the facts that no one would argue with, the indisputable facts that everyone in the world would agree has happened. So everything is the way that you're interpreting it, the way you're thinking about it. And when you can separate those two things out, something magical happens. There's more than one way to think about things that happen, and there's more than one way to interpret a circumstance, which doesn't mean that the way you're thinking about it is wrong or should only seek to cause positive emotion. I'm saying that the way you're thinking about it should be deliberate, because most of the time what happens is we go to this knee-jerk default mode with our brains, and we just are very reactionary with things by the way that we've been conditioned to think about them. So this was a lot to digest. I know, because when I was sitting in your shoes and had never been aware of the difference between the thoughts and the circumstances of my story, it took me a while to get my arms around it and really understand the difference. So we're going to continue on next week talking about it a little bit deeper and giving you some understanding of maybe why it is our minds work that way and why we automatically go to that knee-jerk reaction, and also help you to understand that you thinking negatively or feeling sad when you get news that isn't what you had hoped for doesn't mean that something has gone wrong. And the beauty that we have as humans in having human minds is that we can actually go through and realize that we are human and emotions are part of our life, and not feeling positive and feeling upbeat and feeling grateful for every single thing that happens in our lives is okay. The growth that you'll be able to achieve when you get to understand the difference between the thoughts and the facts in your story will just open yourself up to such a richer, more full life. I can't wait till we meet back here again next week, and we're going to go even a bit deeper on thoughts versus circumstances. Have an awesome week, and remember, it is never too late to discover your meaning.